It was supposed to be a fresh start, a new home, a quiet suburb, and a picture-perfect marriage that had weathered every storm. But at 3:14 a.m. on a cold January night in Ohio, 2 911 calls came in, back to back. The first was from a neighbor reporting screaming, and what sounded like gunshots. The second was from a woman, calm, almost numb. Her words, "There's been a murder. One, actually." Police rushed to the scene and found a nightmare waiting, the body in the master bedroom. What the police would uncover over the next 48 hours unraveled not just a murder, but a deeply calculated trap set by a woman who had already been pushed past a limit. This wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't even about revenge. This was about survival, emotional, psychological, and eventually physical. This is not the story of a woman scorned. It's the story of a woman betrayed beyond imagination, who, after uncovering a chilling web of deceit and manipulation, decided to take justice into her own hands. But was it justice? This is a story of a woman who caught the secret affair of her husband and decided to take the case in her own hand. Evelyn Graves had always been the kind of woman people admired from a distance. Quiet grace, steady smile, PTA president, loved by neighbors, envied by peers. She lived in Oak Ridge Hills, a cozy middle-class neighborhood tucked just outside of Dayton, Ohio, where lawns were trimmed weekly and secrets were buried even deeper than the tree roots lining every cul-de-sac. From the outside, Evelyn's life seemed ideal. Married to Connor Graves, a former college baseball star turned high-performing sales executive, mother to 2 bright-eyed kids, and part-time freelance graphic designer with a growing client list. Connor was known in the community too. Not for scandal, not for violence, but for his charm. The kind of man who remembered birthdays, tipped generously, and made small talk at the gas station. He coached their son's little league team and ran charity races. Everyone called him the couple that had it all. But behind the white vinyl siding of their 2-story home, something had started to shift. It began subtly. Connor came home later than usual. He'd bring up work stress more often, only to change the subject abruptly when Evelyn offered support. He kept his phone locked, started taking calls in the garage, and slowly, so slowly it almost went unnoticed, he stopped calling Evelyn Evie. He started calling her Hey. For a while, she brushed it off. 12 years of marriage will go through its seasons, she told herself. Maybe it was work pressure. Maybe it was the kids, but deep down, she knew something was missing. It wasn't love. It was respect. Connor had grown colder, more distant. Their conversations had become routine transactions. Who's picking up the kids? Did you pay the lawn service? Can you send the mortgage payment? The intimacy was gone. Still, Evelyn tried. She booked a surprise weekend trip for their anniversary. She left notes in his work bag. She even suggested couples therapy. He dismissed them all. And then came Maribel Cruz. Maribel had been hired part-time, mostly for cleaning and childcare. She was 26, polite, with soft features and a quiet demeanor. Evelyn had met her through a local church recommendation board. She passed a background check. She got along with the kids. At first, everything seemed fine. Maribel was discreet, hard-working, and patient with the children. But as weeks turned into months, Evelyn started noticing strange changes. One morning, she walked into the kitchen to find Connor laughing with Maribel, the kind of laugh she hadn't heard from him in over a year. Another time, she noticed a new bottle of perfume in the upstairs guest bathroom. Not hers, not Maribel's usual scent. She asked once. Maribel said it was a gift from her cousin, and Evelyn wanted to believe it. But the gut never lies. Then came the missing jewelry. First, a gold bracelet. Then, an heirloom ring, her grandmother's. Each time, Maribel claimed she'd never seen them. Evelyn didn't confront her directly. She didn't want to appear paranoid. Instead, She installed a hidden camera, one of those motion-activated types tucked into a fake smoke detector above the living room. She didn't tell Connor. She just waited. And within days, the silence broke. It wasn't just laughter. It was touches, long glances, a moment caught on tape. Connor brushing Maribel's hair from her face, his hand lingering just a little too long. It felt like being punched in the chest. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table that night with her hands shaking, eyes locked on the grainy footage. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just sat there, piecing together the story in front of her, the one she never wanted to believe. Connor wasn't stressed from work. He was cheating, in her own house, with a woman Evelyn had hired and trusted, a woman who had smiled in her face while slowly dismantling her family. Evelyn's first instinct was to leave, take the kids, grab a lawyer, and burn the bridge behind her. But she didn't, because she knew that walking away would give Connor what he wanted, freedom with no consequences. Instead, Evelyn did something far more calculated. She took screenshots, downloaded backups of the video, checked his phone records late at night. She watched, she waited, and she learned everything. Maribel had been staying late more often, claiming to do laundry, prepare dinner, help the kids with homework. Connor had started paying her more, under the table. He created a second Venmo account Evelyn had never seen before. And the worst part? She found texts from Maribel to Connor. Explicit, manipulative, but even more revealing. Plans to leave Evelyn, to gain full custody of the children, to liquidate shared assets, to build a new life without Evelyn in the picture. And that's when Evelyn snapped. Not in rage, not in hysteria, but in icy clarity. She realized this wasn't just betrayal. It was war, and she had been asleep on the battlefield. But not anymore. From that night forward, she documented everything. Her husband's financial activity, Maribel's routine, conversations recorded discreetly, and a diary of her own, a record of every slight, every betrayal, every step toward the line they didn't know they were crossing. She even hired someone, a quiet man named Glenn, a private investigator she found through a friend. Glenn didn't ask questions. He got the answers. And those answers would change everything. Because what Evelyn uncovered next wasn't just about a secret affair. It was about premeditation, manipulation, and a plan that involved taking far more than just a marriage. Evelyn Graves knew that truth has weight, and the moment she uncovered it, it began to crush her in silence. But as the evidence grew, so did her resolve. What she discovered wasn't an impulsive affair. It was a coordinated deception, one meant to leave her stripped of everything she had built. While Connor kissed their children goodnight and smiled across the dinner table, he was drafting emails to a realtor about listing their home, without Evelyn's knowledge. The plan wasn't to confess. It was to replace. Documents revealed that Connor had already met with a family attorney. He'd falsely claimed Evelyn was emotionally unstable, creating a legal trail to later use in court. The worst part? The affidavits had Maribel's signature as a witness. Maribel Cruz wasn't just involved. She was embedded, a co-conspirator, actively helping him build a case against the woman who gave her a job and trusted her in her home. Glenn, the private investigator Evelyn hired, was methodical. He obtained footage of secret lunch meetings between Connor and Maribel on weekdays Evelyn believed he was traveling. Bank statements showed large withdrawals made under the guise of business expenses. Funds funneled into a separate account now listed in Maribel's name. But it was a recorded conversation that truly flipped the narrative. In one audio clip, Maribel said softly, "She's fragile. Connor, I've seen it. You keep pushing her. She'll fall apart on her own. She won't fight." Connor replied, "That's the idea. The courts will never hand the kids to someone who can't even hold it together." That one sentence changed everything. This wasn't just infidelity. It was character assassination, carefully planned. strategically led. Connor wasn't trying to leave Evelyn. He was preparing to erase her. With every discovery, Evelyn's grief turned into something sharper. She wasn't going to plead or beg. She was going to expose him. Her first step was subtle. She stopped confronting, stopped questioning. She pretended she hadn't seen the texts, the photos, the emails. She smiled more. She played the role they expected. Docile, distracted, emotionally fragile. Let them believe she was too weak to notice the walls closing in. Behind that mask, she created her own wall of evidence. She began storing backups in cloud drives Connor didn't have access to. Glenn helped her gather timestamps, transcripts, financial inconsistencies, all organized with the care of someone preparing for battle. She also reached out to Natalie, a longtime friend who worked at a law firm 2 counties over. Natalie didn't ask why Evelyn needed a referral for a high-stakes family attorney. She just handed over the contact and said, "When you move, make it count." Then came the night that tipped the balance. Evelyn returned home early from a family visit. She hadn't told Connor she was cutting the trip short. As she walked through the front door, the scent of wine and the sound of laughter hit her like a train. In the living room, couch pillows tossed, wine glasses half empty, sat Connor and Maribel. She wasn't in her uniform. She wasn't even pretending anymore. And Connor, shirt half unbuttoned, looked startled but not sorry. He stood up, stammered something about a surprise, a misunderstanding. But Evelyn said nothing. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She took one long look, turned, and walked to her bedroom. She locked the door and smiled, for the first time in weeks. Because that night, she sent her lawyer everything. The videos, the texts, the recordings, the bank statements. She also wrote a formal affidavit of her own. A story not of rage, but a betrayal so deep it required no dramatics. Just facts. Verified, archived, and timed. The next morning, Connor received a letter via courier. Not a divorce filing, yet just a cease and desist order demanding Maribel vacate the property within 48 hours and informing Connor of pending legal action related to spousal deception and financial misrepresentation. Maribel left the house that day, shaking. She packed quickly, didn't look Evelyn in the eyes. Evelyn stood at the top of the stairs, holding her daughter's stuffed animal like it was armor. Connor exploded later that night. Accused Evelyn of spying, paranoia, of trying to ruin his life. She simply replied, "I have nothing to ruin. You already tried to take it all." What followed was a strange truce. Connor didn't leave. He couldn't. He needed to maintain appearances. His name still meant something in the community, and Evelyn knew he cared more about that image than anything else. So, for 2 weeks, they played house. He smiled at neighbors. She packed the kids' lunches. They shared a roof, but slept in different rooms. They sat at the same table, but lived on opposite sides of a war that hadn't yet reached court. During that time, Evelyn finished the final step in her plan, contacting the Board of Ethics at Connor's company. Using the evidence she had collected, she submitted an anonymous complaint with attachments outlining misuse of company funds, possible tax fraud, and inappropriate conduct with an employee on paid time. The response was swift. A formal inquiry was launched. Connor was suspended, and once his paycheck stopped, the pressure mounted. He came to her once, quiet in the hallway. "Why are you doing this?" Her answer was quiet, steady, devastating. "Because I trusted you, and you used my life as a strategy." It wasn't just about him anymore. Evelyn knew what people like Connor and Maribel relied on: silence, denial, gaslighting. But she wasn't a victim. She was a witness. And the trial ahead wouldn't just be legal. It would be public. It would be unforgiving. And she would be ready. It was supposed to be an ordinary Thursday evening. The kids were with Evelyn's sister for a long weekend. Connor had just returned from a company hearing, walking through the door with tired eyes and no words. The house was silent, too silent, the kind of silence that tells you something's about to break. Evelyn was already in the kitchen, stacking plates like nothing had happened. But she felt it, the tension in the air, the restrained fury between them. She didn't look at him when he entered. "I saw the letter," Connor said, voice low. She didn't reply. "I lost my job, Evelyn." Still no reply. He slammed his keys on the counter. "You think this is over? You think ruining me makes you safe?" Her hands were steady, her breathing even. "You did that yourself, Connor." She turned to him then, finally meeting his eyes. What she saw wasn't just anger. It was fear disguised as control. And fear, when cornered, becomes dangerous. Connor paced the floor, fists clenched. "You don't understand what you've done. You think the courts will believe you? You think you're the victim." "I have proof," she said calmly, "of everything. The affair, the recordings, the bank transfers. You're not just a liar. Connor, you're a criminal." The words cut through the room like glass. Connor lunged forward, slamming his hand on the countertop. That's when Evelyn reached for her phone, but he was faster. He grabbed it and tossed it across the kitchen. It hit the wall, cracking the screen. "You're not leaving me with nothing," he growled. She took a step back. "You already left me, Connor, long before Maribel, long before the lies." There was a pause, a dangerous stillness, and then he stormed out of the house. Evelyn stood alone, pulse thundering in her ears. He would be back. She knew it. What she didn't know was that he wouldn't be alone. 2 hours later, under the cover of night, Connor returned. Maribel was with him. Both of them entered the house without a word. Evelyn had been sitting on the edge of her bed, her lawyer on speed dial, when she heard the front door open. She grabbed the small recorder she had hidden in her dresser, just in case. She hit record and slipped it into her back pocket. Footsteps echoed through the hallway. Then voices. Connor and Maribel were arguing. Not with Evelyn, but with each other. "She's going to bury us." Maribel hissed. "You said she wouldn't fight." "She wasn't supposed to," he shouted back. "She was supposed to break down. Give up. Not this. She has everything. Connor, I'm not going to prison because you underestimated her. I'll handle it." They didn't know she was listening. From the top of the stairs, Evelyn recorded every word. That's when things turned. Maribel spotted her. "She's here." Maribel shouted. Evelyn backed away. Her hand was shaking, still gripping the recorder. Connor rushed up the stairs after her. "You don't want to do this," Evelyn warned. "Give me the files," he roared. "Where are they?" "There are copies," she said. "Even if you take what's here, it's too late." Maribel grabbed something heavy from the living room, a brass candle holder Evelyn had once placed on the mantel. She followed Connor up the stairs, trembling but determined. "Don't!" Evelyn shouted. But it was too late. Connor reached the bedroom first. He shoved Evelyn against the wall, grabbing her by the arm. "Give it to me." She screamed, and in that split second, Maribel stepped into the doorway and raised a candle holder. Everything stopped. Then, impact. But not on Evelyn. Connor dropped to the floor with a sickening thud, blood spreading beneath his head like spilled ink. Maribel stared at the object in her hand, lips parted, shaking. "I didn't mean. He moved, I thought." Evelyn stood frozen. Connor wasn't moving. Panic surged through Maribel. She looked at Evelyn, tears already running down her face. "We have to call someone. We need to fix this." But Evelyn didn't answer. She reached into her pocket, turned off the recorder, and walked out of the room. Slowly, carefully, she picked up the house phone and dialed 911. "I need to report an assault," she said calmly. There's a man in my home. He's unconscious, bleeding, possibly dead. The operator asked her to stay on the line. She set the phone down and waited. When the police arrived, the scene was quiet. Maribel was kneeling next to Connor, sobbing. Evelyn sat at the bottom of the staircase, hands folded in her lap. Detectives entered the room and secured the area. One of them, a young officer named Reed, stepped over to Evelyn. "Can you tell us what happened?" "Yes," she said, "but I need you to listen carefully." She handed over the recorder and every document she had printed and placed into a single red file folder. "This wasn't just a fight," she said. "It was a setup. I was being stalked, manipulated, and tonight, this was a result of that." Reed took the files, eyebrows furrowing as he flipped through the evidence. Inside, the bedroom had become a crime scene. Blood on the carpet, a cracked candle holder, a man unresponsive, a woman in shock. The photographs taken that night would later go public. 2 women on opposite ends of a tragedy, 1 dead man between them, and a story that didn't fit neatly into any box. Evelyn's neighbors described her as quiet, private, kind. Connor's colleague said he was charming, smart, successful. Maribel, no one knew much about her, except Evelyn. But by sunrise, they were all headlines. 2 women, 1 dead man, a marriage built on secrets, and a night that changed everything. By 6:40 a.m., the house on Willow Ridge Lane had turned into a crime scene. Patrol cars blocked both ends of the cul-de-sac. Yellow tape fluttered across the front yard. News vans rolled in faster than the forensic team. It wasn't just a domestic tragedy. It was becoming a public spectacle. Leading the investigation was Detective Jalen Roscoe, a sharp-minded veteran of the homicide unit known for his grit and emotional discipline. Roscoe didn't deal in gossip or speculation. He worked with precision, trusting data, timelines, and inconsistencies to do the talking. As he walked through the home, Roscoe immediately noticed a contrast, a tastefully decorated house, now frozen in the aftermath of violence. Blood stained the master bedroom rug. A shattered glass tumbler lay beneath the dresser. There were no signs of forced entry. No valuables missing. The struggle, if any, had been brief. This wasn't a break-in. This was something much more personal. Connor's body had already been removed by the time Roscoe arrived. The mid-early report was clear, blunt force trauma to the base of the skull. The object? A heavy brass candle holder found on the floor beside the bed. 1 strike. Instant fatality. 2 women were at the center of it all. Evelyn sat calmly in the interview room. Her voice was steady, her hands folded on the table like she'd rehearsed this moment for months. Maribel, on the other hand, was curled into herself, hands trembling as she spoke to her public defender. Roscoe split his attention between evidence and motive. The recordings Evelyn handed over weren't just scraps. They were a full timeline of psychological warfare. Voicemails, tracked emails, password resets she hadn't initiated, even conversations that had been secretly recorded inside the home. And most damaging of all, proof that Connor had been tracking her with a mobile GPS up installed without her knowledge. The flash drive Evelyn provided revealed more. Photos of her movements, text exchanges between Connor and Maribel about keeping her in line, and encrypted files that Evelyn had painstakingly decoded. They showed financial manipulation, silent account drains, and scheduled wire transfers to an offshore entity linked to Connor's shell company. It was chillingly methodical. Roscoe played one particular audio file multiple times. In it, Connor could be heard saying, "She won't leave, not if I control what she thinks is real. I don't need her to love me. I need her to obey me." This wasn't just infidelity. It was psychological abuse engineered with surgical precision. Meanwhile, Maribel's story kept shifting. Initially, she claimed she walked in on an argument and reacted to protect Evelyn. Hours later, under questioning, she admitted to knowing about the surveillance and claimed Connor had promised her money and a green card if she helped neutralize the threat Evelyn posed. "Did he tell you to harm her?" Roscoe asked. "No," she whispered. "He said would scare her. That's all. I thought he meant expose her, make her leave." "But you picked up the weapon." "I didn't mean to. It was reflex. He grabbed her first. I panicked." Roscoe pressed further. "Why didn't you call for help after you went down?" "I was in shock. I thought we'd both go to jail. I didn't know what she'd say." Evelyn, in contrast, had an answer for every question, and all of it was backed by months of documented evidence. She had records of therapy sessions, timestamps of emotional breakdowns, and a full dossier prepared for the day Connor might snap. Still, Roscoe wasn't ready to take her at face value. Her actions raised legitimate concerns. She had stayed in a toxic environment, compiled a legal-grade evidence package, and recorded conversations with both Connor and Maribel over weeks. Some might call that courage, others premeditation. But the deeper Roscoe dug, the more disturbing Connor's pattern became. Digital forensics recovered files from a cloud backup that showed similar activity in prior relationships. There were private messages from 2 other women, both claiming emotional blackmail. One file included a journal entry titled Control Mechanisms for Emotional Compliance, written in Connor's handwriting. Roscoe's stomach turned. He'd seen control before. He'd seen obsession. But this was something altogether colder. Clinical. Further interviews with Connor's colleagues revealed a man admired publicly, feared privately. There were no formal complaints, but whispered rumors told a different story. Unusual late-night meetings, emotional outbursts behind closed doors, and sudden transfers of women he had once mentored. Evelyn's attorney pushed for her release on the grounds of psychological abuse and self-defense. But the DA wasn't convinced. The public needed accountability. 2 lives were ruined, 1 lost, and Maribel's involvement complicated things. The prosecution debated how to proceed. Was this a domestic dispute turned fatal? Or was Evelyn a woman who knew exactly what she was doing, using manipulation as her own weapon? The truth, Roscoe believed, was messier. Real-life cases didn't fit neatly into courtroom narratives. Evelyn wasn't a heroine, nor was she a villain. She was a woman who had been silenced for years, and when she found her voice, it came with collateral damage. Maribel was transferred to the county facility while awaiting charges. Evelyn was released on bond, pending further investigation. Outside the precinct, protesters gathered, some shouting for justice for Connor, others demanding freedom for Evelyn. The case had split the city. Public opinion wasn't just divided, it was electric. Roscoe sat in his office at night, files spread across his desk. His gut told him they weren't at the end. They were at the start of something much deeper, because behind all the evidence, beneath all the trauma, there were still unanswered questions. How far had Evelyn planned her response? Did Maribel act alone in the moment, or had she been conditioned to strike? And most of all, was this really the story of a woman snapping, or was it the story of someone finally refusing to be broken? He closed the folder slowly, looked out the window, and made a note in his pad. Motive isn't always hatred. Sometimes it's survival sharpened into resolve. As the trial commenced, public attention surged. National headlines branded it the Housemaid murder plot. Crowds gathered outside the courthouse daily, eager to witness the unraveling of a case soaked in betrayal, psychological warfare, and chilling manipulation. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but courtroom sketches and witness leaks flooded the internet, fueling endless speculation. Evelyn Graves sat at the defense table, stoic yet visibly worn by the emotional toll. Her lead attorney, Michelle Lawton, a sharp and strategic legal mind known for defending abuse victims, had carefully built a case around Evelyn's fear-driven decisions and calculated self-preservation. Across the aisle stood Assistant District Attorney Reed Maloney, whose goal was clear: portray Evelyn not as a victim, but as an intelligent woman who had crossed a line, knowingly allowing violence to unfold. In opening statements, Maloney wasted no time. This case is not about panic. It's about power. Evelyn Graves had time. She had options, but she chose silence and strategy. Lawton's opening struck a different chord. She wasn't silent. She was screaming without sound, and no one was listening. The system failed her long before this courtroom opened. The prosecution laid out their timeline methodically. They introduced phone logs, surveillance footage, digital records, all showing Evelyn's awareness of her husband Connor's affair with a housemaid, Maribel Cruz. But the centerpiece of the state's case was Evelyn's decision to remain in the marriage after uncovering the truth. They argued it wasn't fear, it was planning. Detective Jalen Roscoe, who had led the investigation, testified for nearly 4 hours. His demeanor was calm, his delivery meticulous. He confirmed the discovery of Evelyn's hidden digital files, audio recordings, screenshots of threatening texts, and documented tracking software she'd secretly found on her phone. Roscoe explained that Connor's behavior extended beyond infidelity. He detailed patterns of coercive control, surveillance, and threats. The court listened to one recording where Connor's voice calmly said, "You'll never be anything without me, so don't start acting brave now." It was a gut-punch moment in court. But it was Maribel Cruz's testimony that shifted the tone entirely. Dressed in a correctional facility uniform, hands trembling slightly, she spoke with remorse and vulnerability. "I never meant for anyone to get hurt," she said. "Connor promised me everything. He said Evelyn was cold, abusive, that he needed saving." She paused. "I believed him, but I learned the truth too late. I was part of something that broke a woman completely." The defense used Maribel's word to highlight Connor's manipulation, how he played women against each other, creating dependency, confusion, and isolation. ADA Maloney pressed back during cross-examination. "So you're saying you were brainwashed?" "I'm saying we were both under his control, just in different cages." Then came one of the most impactful exhibits of the entire trial, a journal recovered from Evelyn's private drive. In it, she described daily emotional exhaustion, notes to herself, warnings, reflections. She wrote, "I have to survive one more night. Just one more." Michelle Lawton used this entry in her line of defense, framing Evelyn's decision not as collusion but as entrapment. She was documenting her way out. That's not premeditation. That's proof of how deeply afraid she was. A digital forensics expert confirmed Evelyn had backed up files every week but never shared them. She had not gone to police, a decision she later explained during her own testimony. "I didn't trust that it would make a difference," Evelyn told the court. "I didn't think anyone would believe a well-dressed, articulate woman could be a victim behind closed doors." The prosecution pounced on this. "So instead, you waited? You stayed and watched?" "No," Evelyn replied evenly. "I stayed and fought in the only way I knew how, by gathering proof. Because one wrong move, and I knew I wouldn't survive him." Testimony from former colleagues, neighbors, and friends painted a layered picture. Evelyn had been once vibrant, socially active, and sharp. But in the last 18 months, those closest have described her as distant, distracted, shrinking from her own life. "She didn't just change," one friend said. "She disappeared from herself." On the other hand, character witnesses for Connor presented him as passionate, focused, and misunderstood. A few former co-workers denied knowledge of any aggressive behavior. But the defense countered with financial documents showing Connor had created separate accounts, diverting money from their shared assets. Perhaps the most emotional moment came when Evelyn's therapist was called to the stand. She explained a term called compliance trauma, a state where the brain convinces itself that staying quiet is safer than escaping. The therapist detailed how Evelyn's journal entries reflected classic patterns of hypervigilance and internalized fear. The prosecution maintained that Evelyn had time to involve law enforcement and didn't. That silence, they argued, equaled guilt. But Michelle Lawton's closing argument turned that narrative on its head. She didn't stay silent out of malice. She stayed because she believed she had no safe exit. And she's not alone. Thousands of women stay because they've been taught that leaving is the moment the real danger begins. She stepped closer to the jury box. Evelyn didn't kill anyone. She didn't pull a trigger, but she lived in a home where control was law. And when 2 lives ended, it was the first time she had no plan. That wasn't strategy. That was collapse. The closing line hung in the air as silence settled in the courtroom. In response, Maloney offered a sharp, restrained final plea. We cannot build a justice system based on sympathy, only on evidence. And the evidence shows she knew what was coming. As the jury was dismissed as deliberate, the courtroom emptied in slow waves. Outside, media vans lined the street, ready to deliver their verdict analysis. Inside, Evelyn sat still, shoulders slightly slumped, lips pressed tight, waiting for what would come next. Not as a calculated move, but as a woman who had finally spoken the full truth. The jury returned after nearly 2 days of deliberation. Tension inside the courtroom felt suffocating. Every creak of the wooden benches, every whisper among the spectators carried the weight of possibility. This was no longer just about Evelyn Graves' fate. It had become a symbol of justice for victims who suffer behind closed doors, concealed by wealth, marriage vows, and social status. Evelyn sat beside her attorney, Michelle Lawton, expression unreadable. She had spent the past 48 hours in quiet reflection, alone in a holding cell, replaying every moment of a marriage and its violent conclusion. She wasn't sure if freedom could undo the emotional scars, but she knew the truth was finally out. The clock stood as the judge re-entered. All rise. Judge Naomi Whitford, composed and deliberate, acknowledged the jury full person. The 12 jurors, 5 men, 7 women, avoided Evelyn's gaze as they settled in. The judge addressed the full person. Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict? We have, Your Honor. On the charge of accessory to second-degree murder, how do you find the defendant, Evelyn Graves? The full person inhaled. Not guilty. A gasp broke across the room. The judge nodded, gesturing for order. Evelyn's eyes didn't well with tears. She simply closed them for a moment, exhaling the breath she'd been holding for years. The courtroom shifted. The press whispered updates to their crews. Some people stared in disbelief, others in relief. The undercurrent of the case, abuse, power, secrecy, had struck deeply with the public, and the verdict added fuel to an already polarizing conversation. But there were still other charges to address. On the charge of obstruction of justice, the judge continued, How do you find the defendant? Guilty. Murmurs spread again. The jury had drawn a line. Evelyn hadn't caused the deaths, but she had allowed critical information to stay hidden. It was a legal compromise, acknowledging fear, but not excusing silence. Evelyn nodded slowly. She understood. Even if her reasons were rooted in survival, lives had been lost. Maribel Cruz, though manipulated, had acted on her own volition, but Evelyn's decision not to seek help had allowed the chain of events to continue. Before sentencing, both the prosecution and defense were allowed final statements. ADA Maloney took the floor. His tone was less aggressive than earlier in the trial. The jury recognized a complex truth. He said, Ms. Graves was a victim, yes, but also a gatekeeper of knowledge that might have changed the outcome. He didn't demand maximum sentencing. Instead, he requested a balanced consequence that would acknowledge the nuance of the case. Michelle Lawton then rose. We're not asking for leniency, she said, her voice calm but firm. We're asking for understanding. Evelyn has paid for her silence with years of mental imprisonment. What she needs now is not further punishment, but support to rebuild what was nearly destroyed. The judge reviewed the sentencing guidelines. Obstruction of justice in this case carried a potential of up to 5 years. Everyone braced as she began to speak. Ms. Graves, Judge Whitford said, "This court has reviewed not only your actions but the conditions under which they occurred. The psychological evidence, the witness testimony, and your own documentation show a woman under immense duress. Still, your failure to report what you knew contributed to an environment where tragedy was allowed to unfold." A long pause followed. "I hereby sentence you to 18 months in a state rehabilitation and transitional facility with mandated trauma counseling, community restitution, and post-release monitoring. Time already served will be considered." Evelyn didn't flinch. She nodded, acknowledging responsibility without protest. The sentence wasn't seen as harsh. It wasn't viewed as soft. It was, by most accounts, appropriate. It acknowledged what had been endured, but didn't erase the lives lost in the process. After the gavel struck, the courtroom began to empty. Outside, cameras clicked, reporters shouted questions, and protesters held up signs, some supporting Evelyn as a survivor, others condemning her inaction. Maribel Cruz had received a separate trial and was sentenced to 25 years with eligibility for parole in 15. In her final statement, she apologized to the families involved, expressing genuine regret. Her legal team argued for psychological manipulation as a mitigating factor, and the court partly agreed. As for Connor Graves, his name became a cautionary tale. His dual life, his controlled tactics, and his downfall were dissected across media platforms. Podcasts, documentaries, and op-eds debated whether he was a monster, a product of unchecked entitlement, or a symptom of a wider societal problem. Months after the sentencing, Evelyn began to rebuild. At the rehabilitation facility, she joined group therapy, met other survivors of psychological abuse, and found a way to reframe her story not just as one of survival, but of recovery. In a journal entry released with her permission to a trauma advocacy organization, she wrote, "It wasn't the bruises that broke me. It was the silence I kept. I thought strength meant staying. Now I know. It means leaving even when the door is locked." The system, while imperfect, had offered her a sliver of accountability wrapped in mercy. More importantly, her case had sparked change. 2 advocacy bills for early domestic surveillance intervention passed in her state following public pressure inspired by her story. The Graves case reminded the nation that not every victim bears visible wounds, and not every crime comes with fingerprints. Control, coercion, and manipulation, those left no bruises, but they left scars all the same. And for Evelyn, those scars had begun to heal, not erased by a verdict, but marked by the courage to survive and, finally, to speak. The courtroom may have gone silent, but the echoes of this case still haunt every corner it touched. 2 lives lost, a marriage built on manipulation, and a woman caught between fear and survival. Evelyn Graves wasn't just a wife. She was a prisoner in plain sight. And while justice took a complicated path, it finally reached her door. But the questions remain. Was her silence justified? Could the tragedy have been prevented? And how many more stories like this are still hidden behind closed doors? Let us know what you think in the comments below. If you found this story gripping, disturbing, or eye-opening, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you never miss a case like this again.